The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Michael,
So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar in the International Society of Chief Data Officers series of building and supporting the Chief Data Officer or the data leader in their work. We are very fortunate today to have Gary Griffin and David Holcomb with us talking about building a data culture. So can we go the next slide, please? So, and I can tell you how excited I am for this, building a data culture. I'm currently not just in my guise as the head of the International Society of Chief Data Officers, but in real life, if you like, leading a change program to do just that in a government department in Europe. And I can tell you that if I wasn't sat here introducing it, I'd be sat with you as one of the attendees of this webinar, knowing who we've got here and the vast experience that they have and that they're going to be able to share with us. Next slide, please. So first we have Gary Griffin. I'm taking it that since you're all data people that you can all read. There's Gary's resume. He's a great guy. There's lots to talk about in how he has used data and how he's worked with people who use data throughout his career. And I know that he is going to produce some really deep insights that will help all of us in the change programs that we're working on. And next slide. And David Holcomb here for you. David not only is he equally as experienced, but has experience with as a chief data officer and a chief operating officer. So he sat on both sides, if you like, of the fence. And so he's going to be able to draw on those varied experiences, both as the data change person and the person who's leading the organization that is having to change how they do data as well. Now, what's going to be important here is that they've got a lot to put in, but there is time at the end for questions. If you go into the questions box, wherever it's on the right-hand side of my screen, could be anywhere on yours, put your questions. We will spend time right at the end addressing those questions and trying to get you the answers that you're after. And we still hope to do all of that within the allotted hour. So without further ado, I'm excited. Over to you,
Gary. Yep.
Gary and David, and I'm looking forward to this.
Well, thank you. I know we're bringing up the slides now, so we're gonna jump in. I'm David Holcomb, and so I'll get us started with just kind of telling you what we're going to tell you. The goal of this is really to kind of describe the concept of culture and then how you can manage it. Everybody thinks culture is something mystical. Well, hopefully by the end of the day, you won't look at it as quite as so. And then the agenda for today is we're going to talk a little bit about how we came up with the book. Gary's going to cover that and talk a little bit about how we came up with the book and then why culture is important to talk about. And then after we do that, we're going to jump into exploring culture. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a nerd alert. It's going to be kind of geeky sometimes when we talk about this stuff because you just can't talk about it without having a little bit of that kind of thing happening. And then we're going to talk about managing culture, everything from looking at organizational structures to looking at tools and then kind of laying out how you chart that forward. Then we'll wrap it up and open it up for questions. Okay, so this is kind of our agenda for the day. And so at this point, I'm going to just jump right in and turn it over to Gary to talk about, how we got here and why culture is important.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. Thanks for joining us. So why is culture important? Wanted to give a little bit of a background here about why building a data culture, why this book, why now, how did we arrive here? So I'm kind of, as you can see from my bio description, I've been at this quite a while, and I'm kind of toward the end of my career, definitely more years behind me than in front of me. So I was looking for a chance to do something kind of a legacy kind of enterprise digital transformation, data transformation project, something to, end on a positive note, because again, my career is kind of winding down now. And so I found this opportunity, 5-year digital transformation project, and followed all the best practices, got a lot of the foundational pieces put into place, but at the end was struggling to really get enterprise adoption. This environment was probably the toughest culture I think I've ever been in, and I've been in probably 40 different heavy consulting backgrounds, so probably 40 different environments in my life, and but this one was extremely difficult. So that led me to think about this need in the literature, very well read, so I know what's out there. This need in the literature didn't really address this. A post on LinkedIn, probably the closest thing that I've ever had to go viral. That led me down the road of, I had met David. He was working on his second dissertation research, and we formed a friendship, similar backgrounds, and started talking about this. And that's how we came to write the book, Building a Data Culture, the Usage and Flow Data Culture Model. So, yeah, this stuff is hard, and it's if you read all the literature, there's a high failure rate. So here we have if 87% of all data projects fail, 66% of IT projects, that's huge. And so maybe then it's not just simply the tech, but maybe it just might have something to do with culture. So again, heavy consulting background. I like this slide here because what I'm trying to do, the kind of changes, I'm definitely a change agent. That's what I do. I show up when organizations need to make changes, because that's what I'm about. And so I find that I put these as walls, 3 walls that are probably the biggest challenges that I encounter. And the first, of course, is culture. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but getting a budget. And you've got to have an appropriate budget. This stuff is not going to be free. It takes time. It costs some money. So you're going to have some budget, and so that can often be a challenge in any organization. And then, of course, knowledge, skills, and abilities. There's any type of data change, data culture change. You're going to have a significant tech component to it. But just the data culture itself, the knowledge, skills, and abilities, you're going to have those, and you're going to need to. If you don't have them in-house, build them in-house, and or maybe go out and get some consultants and things like that. But it takes time to do that, and it's an investment. But the bigger one that is really the real challenge, I think, is the culture wall. And the reason it's such a big challenge is you have to realize, so you've got this 800-pound gorilla pushing back. It's people. People are the ones that create culture, and it's more than create, though. They are a part of the culture. They participate. They enforce and reinforce culture through attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, and that's what you're trying to do when you start making changes. You've got to change hearts and minds. You've got to change people, the way they're thinking, those kind of things. So that's why it's such a challenge. So then another thought, if it's not the tech, it is the culture, then how do you deal with that? Again, back to why did we write this book? Then, again, it just really wasn't a good resource out there in the literature from my perspective, from our perspective, I should say. And so then how do you deal with that? So culture, yeah, again, it seems a little mysterious. It's this invisible force, kind of like this saying that we put into the book here, this quote: culture is a little like dropping Alka-Seltzer into a glass. You can't really see it, but you know something is going on. Culture is the same way. You can't really see it, touch it, but it's a powerful force, and it is there, and it is happening. but it can be managed, and we want to demystify that a little here today. So let's jump in and explore culture. David, tell us about organizational culture and decision rights.
You bet. So we want to start the conversation just off the beginning with, I'm going to be getting a little geeky here and a little nerdy here because I have a diagram in front of me and I'm going to explain the diagram. But hopefully you'll gain insight out of this as we go through it. So there's two researchers named Cameron and Quinn who put together this thing called the competing values model. And that's what this is, okay? And so this is what you're seeing are the two values. The values are focus and structure, okay? So this is, what is the focus of the organization? Are you internally focused? Are you more driven by the marketplace? So that's what's on the horizontal axis there that you see, right? So you know companies that basically what they do is they manufacture things. They're not so worried about the market changing because somebody else is selling the product, or maybe they're a distributor and they're distributing the products, but they're really focused in on that manufacturing side of it, or very internally focused. Then you have companies that are out there trying to sell new products, make new products, differentiate high end sometimes, et cetera, or differentiate their products in the marketplace. And sometimes they're early on and they're in high growth and innovation, like a startup, or sometimes they're bigger companies that are trying to go for that, higher reach, right? So this is the way that the competing values model works. So one is looking at that external and internal focus, and then the second one is the structure and the decision rights capability. Is it flexible, more discretion, like in that startup that's just getting going? Or is it a lot more stable and have a high level of control? You've encountered this where everything is about the process. You know, even vice presidents say, I can't do anything without changing the process first, right? So you have those types of situations where the structure of the organization is there, and it's very important that you realize that that's where your data strategy is going to fall a lot on, is on that structure side, on that decision rights side. And there are two types of decision rights that are out there. There are the decision makers and there are influencers, people who don't necessarily make the decision, but can influence the decision maker to make those decisions. So when you're looking at an organization's culture, you're looking at it basically, well, what are they focused on? And then how did they structure themselves in order to get that done? That's going to be very important when we start talking about concepts of a data culture, and specifically on how usage and flow can play a role in that. And this is where we started when we began talking about, what do you need to know? Well, you need to understand your organization, and we're going to give you some key ways of doing that. But you got to know this in order to work with this data culture and building a successful data culture. So, Gary, talk to us a little bit about the usage and flow data model, the usage and flow data culture model, and how it fits into this.
So, yes, taking those concepts from Cameron and Quinn and applying them to a data culture, because you hear that word all the time. So what does that really mean? I wish I could say that we came up with this model, this usage and flow data culture model, UFDCM, with just one meeting, but that wasn't the case. It was many months of conversations and back and forth, synergizing ideas, and so it was a lot of work to come up with it. But we took that organizational culture model, competing values, and we applied it here to the data culture and identified two concepts. They seem disconnected, and but when you put them together, and that is data usage and data flow, when you put those two concepts together, it gives you insight into those competing values and how they work inside a data culture. And so if we look at the horizontal, the data flow, we have a continuum from authoritarian to total open access democratization. And then if we look at the vertical, the usage all the way down at the bottom, the results outcome. We're looking at just measurement and efficiency, like what happened, why did it happen, maybe all the way up at the top to complete understanding and differentiation. On the usage, that's where you get into more prescriptive and these days AI and cognitive. Looking at those two competing values, the usage and the flow, we were able to identify what we saw as 4 very distinct data culture types, and put those into the 4 quadrants. Starting at the upper right, we have the progressive data culture, the lower right, the traditional data culture, and the lower left, a protectionist data culture, and upper left, preservationist. Each of these are, again, distinctive data culture types and have distinct attributes, needs, on both the flow as well as the usage, both data usage and data flow. And so one of the things that we do an extensive description in the book of how these work together and what they actually mean. But one of the things I want to point out is so often, and I've made this mistake myself, people start with the idea that everybody wants to be a progressive data culture and that they need to be a progressive data culture. And I've made that same mistake. And that's not true. And that's not the whole point of this, this model. There's nothing wrong or right about any specific data culture type. You can legitimately be in any one of these 4 quadrants. Now, you may want to move more toward the middle if you were, say, a protectionist data culture up on the usage, or more toward the middle on the flow. And that is the roadmap, the challenge of maturing your data culture. But there's no right or wrong answer here. All of these are legitimate data culture types, and that's what we wanted to make sure that we explain in the book. But when you find yourself in one of these quadrants, when you are dealing with a specific data culture type, you want to make sure that you are aligning that, of course, with your organizational culture and your organizational strategy. And then from there, start your journey. Understanding that first, though, is kind of the key to success, your long-term success. David, how does decision rights, how do decision rights apply to the UFDCM?
Yeah, so Gary mentioned the idea of usage and flow, right? And how everybody, if they looked at this, they go, ooh, I want to be progressive. I want to be in the progressive culture. I mean, full democratization, we're doing everything, cognitive analytics and so forth. And you always have to ask that question of, is it matching the decision rights of the organization? Because if you have decision rights and you don't have data, in other words, it's not enough flow, and the usage that is given to you is not matching what you need. So for example, if I send a 5-year trend to somebody who's working on the production line, who just needs to know what the current value is for something for the sake of quality, then that's just going to confuse them. They won't know what to do with it. It's just too much data for the decision rights that they have. They just got to make an easy decision. I need to know A or B. I don't need to know 5 years trends and so forth. Now that person's boss might need to know that, because they may be looking at whether or not the line is kicking out quality products all the time. So when you give data without decision rights, or you give too much data without decision rights to act on it, you create a lot of confusion, because people don't know if you want them to use that data, or they don't know if you want them to make a decision. Maybe I'm supposed to decide something with that. Well, the opposite's true as well. If I have decision rights, but I don't have enough data, then I'm going to get frustrated. So it's important that you understand not just that it should flow to them, but how do they need it? What is the usage proper for their decision-making process? When you step back and objectively look at that question, you will be able to feel much better what's going on in the organization. Secondarily, it's also important that when you start talking about decision rights, that you understand how the organization acts on those decision rights. So if a boss has oversight to what his subordinates have, you should make sure that they're seeing the same things so that you know that things roll up and so forth. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but really it's about knowing that you got to have the right data amount to the decision rights that exist. Otherwise, too much data is going to breed confusion. Not enough data is going to breed frustration. So you need to understand what decisions people are allowed to make. So this is really why the usage and flow data culture model works against the organizational model. Okay, so Gary, let's move on and talk a little bit about how we can start to manage this. Okay.
So managing culture.
Yep. So I'm going to continue with kind of the importance of the organizational structures. Now, we talked a little bit about it whenever I talked about the idea of decision rights, but it's also important because the culture actually both shape the organizational culture is shaping the organizational structure, and then that's going to shape your data culture. And you can use organizational structure to your advantage, especially when you're starting to put together your data products. And data products are everything from alerts to reports. And the more that you can work the organizational structure into your data products, the more they will be accepted as cultural. In fact, if you do it right, and you put, for example, if you have a hierarchical culture, a hierarchical structure in your organization, and you build reporting that follows that organization chart, drills down, uses the same language, you can actually start to really develop the language within the organization and get everybody on the same page. And so that's where you, as a CDO, have this opportunity to shape and make cohesion in the culture of the organization by helping the same words and terms be used throughout the organization to mean the same thing. And so it's important that you see that as you're starting to look at the organizational structure, the decision rights, and how your data product's going to match to them. Also, never forget, organizations don't just operate hierarchically. They don't just look at one way. They don't look just vertically, they look horizontally. So there's a lot of organizations that cross and touch across the organization, much like the data organization. You also have to consider that, you know, we talked a little bit about making sure the flow is right. So you got to make sure data accessibility matches the organizational chart as well. This is really why when Gary said he went into an organization, he's been in a bunch of them, he would go in and the first thing he would do is say, give me your org chart. Now, when we started talking about this, whenever we were building the book out, he said, this is why it was just intuitively obvious that that's where it needed to happen. And as we got in deeper, it's like, it's more than just intuitive, it's scientific. These things are real. And they've been proven to be able to make changes in organizations that much easier by recognizing those cultural markers that allow you to make the change. So organizational structure is one of those seminal things that you need to ask about. Okay, so once you've gotten an understanding of this, you then want to apply a set of tools to making the change, especially in the data side. So Gary's going to talk a little bit about the tools you need to manage a data culture. Okay.
So yes, when you go into an organization, as I said, very experienced consultant, you start asking for what I call artifacts. And an org chart is one of the first things that I always ask for, but I ask for other things too. I ask for an organizational capabilities map, if they have that. I'll ask for business process flow diagrams. If I'm in a private company, I'll start asking about the business model and the business strategy and how they make money. If I'm in the public sector, it'll be more about the mission and how they serve the constituency and things like that. How do they drive value to them? But those start with on the organizational side, on the business side, and understanding that before I ever really dig into a lot of the data side of the fence. And so we came up with a list of components that we think constitute a mature data culture. We can, of course, debate on whether or not there are other things that you should put into place or could put into place. But I can say that if you've got all of this that we have listed here in the components of a mature data culture, that you're well on your way. So data strategy, of course, is the cornerstone. And we're going to say that you have to have a data strategy regardless of your data culture type. but only that you should not, and that's, so you have to start with a data strategy, but we say that you have to use the usage flow data culture model to understand that data culture type before you actually put that data strategy and construct it, that data strategy, and lay it all out. Of course, trying to set up a data governance office, trying to set up a data governance programs, these are two very big things that people tend to start with, but those are really more, you need to get some other foundational things in place before you do that. These often become very political, especially like if you want to establish a data governance office from the word go, you're already talking about changing the structure, back to the structure of an organization. You're already talking about changing a structure of an organization and who that might report to. So again, can get very political. A data governance program, again, I've seen people try to start with that. That's not the place to start. It's not, because it's not a single thing. It's not a single data project. That if you're going to set up an entire program, that's probably going to involve multiple, and I say multiple, so many different data projects, a lot of change. Back to, you're going to need a budget, you're going to need people with knowledge, skills, and abilities. So it's a big thing, and that can get often very political, because really, to me, that is about getting the business side of the fence to accept ownership of data, and that again can get very political. I always ask about business process flow diagrams, and making sure that that is well documented. David is famous for saying data is the artifact of a process. Yes, I mean, those business processes, the things that are going on there, that is being captured in data. So having some understanding of that is key. That, as well as your data process flow diagrams. If data is a business proposition and what's being captured is all that, who's doing what, where, when, and how is being captured in that data, those data process flow diagrams should be well documented. They should kind of mirror your business process flow diagrams. And of course, data literacy, you're going to need to develop that. Back to the just sharing knowledge across an organization around both the usage and flow of the data, data quality issues and things like that. Data analytics, one of my favorite areas. I'm a researcher by training, of course, so I love crunching data. I started my career doing that. And so if you're talking about starting down at just what happened, why did it happen, what's going to happen, more predictive to prescriptive, and these days, the AI, more cognitive. I've often thought now that with the AI, it's just, wow. If you had a semantically correct enterprise data model, all the metadata and good data quality, and you fed that all into the AI, to the LLM, you can ask all those questions and get answers to it. I mean, with the right guardrails, I mean, the potential is just almost unlimited in terms of innovation and productivity. It's just wow. Of course, the size, though, as we venture more out into the cloud and things like AI, I mean, data privacy and security, and especially in certain data cultures, very, very important. I have a heavy background in, say, education is something I have a passion for. I worked a lot in education. Of course, you have to deal with regulations like FERPA, HIPAA, all the other things that are out there around privacy and security. But choosing the right tools based on the UFDCM, based on the data culture type, key to your long-term success. So you might ask, how do I get there? How do I get this started? So David, tell us about charting that journey.
Sure, thanks, Gary. So first of all, I love this graphic. It's like where am I going? Looking out at a very long journey ahead of you. Well, the first thing that you should do in any journey that you set out for is assess where you are. Start by assessing the organizational life cycle. Where are you? Are you in a startup? Are you in growth mode? Is it mature? Are you in decline? You're trying to figure out how to rejuvenate and restart growth. Are you just clicking along, right? Some companies just click right along. right? There's growth stocks and value stocks, right? So, you have that first thing that you need to take a look at. I also encourage you, as you look at those particular concepts, to also think about the other types of life cycles inside your organization, like the employee life cycle. And how does data fit into the employee life cycle, such as onboarding? Could your business glossary be used in the onboarding process for new employees? And if so, why don't you do that? Why don't you go to HR and say, listen, I have this business glossary that explains all the 3-letter acronyms that we have and what they mean and so forth. Hey, let me come over and do the onboarding. And suddenly the data office becomes part of the culture. It's natural for people to start that early on. So I encourage you to do things like that whenever you're thinking about how the products that you have fit into the organization. Obviously, the organizational culture, as we mentioned earlier, is key to this, because even if you start showing people things, you need to make sure you understand what kind of decision rights they're going to have. And Gary was pointing out earlier that this whole concept of making sure that you've got the right data going the right place at the right time isn't something that is going to be once and done. It's going to continue to change as the culture changes and as you grow and as these types of things change. So it's important to know where you are right now so that you can look forward in trying to put together what we'll eventually call a strategic roadmap. Then you're going to assess the organizational structures. We talked quite a bit about that and figured out what that's for. Gary talked extensively about the components of a mature. Find out where you are today in those spaces, and then start putting together a strategic roadmap about what is the next milestone, what is the next mile marker that tells me that I am moving in that direction. And don't be scared to look at it and say that you may need to change that as you're going, but set that strategic roadmap out there so that you know where you want to be, and then adapt and adjust from there. So when you're charting the journey, know where you are today, and we give you questions inside the book to ask along those lines about each of the different concepts that we're talking about, and ask those questions and be objective about them. A lot of times, you'll want to say, well, this is what I was thinking. Don't, try to avoid too much confirmation bias in there, and really ask the question objectively and say, wow, what could we do that would make it that much better a culture for data? The last thing I'm going to say on this front is, Gary also mentioned data literacy. When you talk about data literacy, you have to talk about what he was talking about what does the business do? Knowing what the business does is vital, because you have to put everything you do in context to the business value that everybody in the organization produces. I once had a DBA who said that he was a DBA, and he worked at Western Union. He actually, that's where it was. He actually worked on one of the fraud databases. Okay, and so he actually made sure that the fraud database was always up so that it could be used during transaction processing. So I explained to him, you're not just a DBA, you're a guy that's keeping the bad guys out. You're the guy who's helping to safeguard the mother's money being sent to a bad guy who's posing as her son caught at the border. You're that guy. You're in that team. You're making that happen. Most people don't understand their value proposition within an organization. And that's an important concept. You should be able to get in there and figure some of those things out. You can help the organization really, really, really become successful using the data that they have. So understanding all of that, and Gary was mentioning it earlier, you got to understand how the business works and how it makes money and does those sorts of things. So all of this is outlined inside of the book. And Gary, I think we have a book, right? So I think it's the next slide. So
yes. So just a couple of comments on the strategic roadmap. Yes, we do try to give you quite an extensive list of questions to ask as you start your journey. That's in chapter 2, but also at the end of the book, we try to give you some real life examples. So we tried to pull one from each quadrant, personal examples, projects that we've been in, transformation types of things, and but just trying to help the reader to understand this, because there's nothing simple about it, and we get that because we've done it for many years, and so it can be a challenge and a little bit daunting when you start to lay out the strategic roadmap. A little bit of a daunting task, but we hope that we've given the tools and the information that will help you get further down that road. So yes, the book is available worldwide, most major book outlets, but specifically Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books a Million, Springer Link. This was published by A-Press, but that's now owned by Springer Nature. Just one more thing here at the bottom, we have been working on a new workshop, a 3-day workshop, building a data and AI culture. If you're an organization that thinks that you could benefit from that type of workshop, we'd love to talk to you. If you're a vendor, you have existing clients, and you would be interested in possibly making this one of your offerings to your clients, again, we'd love to partner up as a business partner and see how we could assist you. The book itself, I spent a great deal of time putting together earlier in the year an undergraduate course, as well as some work on a graduate level course called Building a Data Culture. And so next semester I will be teaching the inaugural Building a Data Culture course at local university, my alma mater. And so if you're representing an education institution, you think you could benefit from that kind of course, putting that out there for your students, again, we'd love to talk to you and see how we could help you move down that road and be successful. Finally, if again, we realize this is kind of a daunting task, but if you're interested in having some conversations like strategic level consulting to help with cultural assessment, mapping, getting your roadmap together, things like that, we'd love to see how we can help you out. Just contact us. So thank you for your time.
So Gary and David, many thanks. We do have some questions that have come in. We wonder if we might be able to, answer these questions. And we will say to our audience, please use the question box on your panel there to enter your questions in. And as we go through these, one of the first questions that come up, Gary and David, was that it was saying that you touched on a very sensitive topic, data ownership. Can you please give us clarity on where the data organization should be situated? IT, business, or a hybrid model where the plumbing is owned by IT and the data by business? Comments on that?
Yes, we talked about this quite a bit in the book. I've spent a lot of my career in a lot of different environments, and I often end up in an IT department. I have, though, worked in other departments, and I have worked for strategy and more on the business side, especially in organizations where I have more domain experience, like education, for example. What I have found is that when you're trying to do some of this stuff like data governance office and a data governance program, again, that's all about the business side of the fence. And I think it works best if that is more on the business side. It can be, again, very political to establish a direct report. And we talk about this in the book, a direct report to say the CEO, if the CDO reported straight to the CEO, that can get kind of political to set that up that way. But I still believe it should, even if that's not possible, I still believe personally, and I think Dave and I, again, we talk about this in the book, that's under strategy. So strategy kind of straddles the fence between IT and business. And it kind of gets the data piece more toward the business side of the fence. And so I have found, again, that the most success when you can get into those situations where you can actually work on the more of the business side of the fence, helping the business to understand how the data works for them and how it helps them, is where you achieve the most success. I mean, let's get real. Business people aren't sitting around every day thinking about data. That's what data people do. So again, so you've got to spend a lot of time helping them understand what that is all about and how it helps them. David, any additional comments there?
Yeah, I've been a CDO in both types of scenarios, and I can say that the organizations, whenever you start talking about IT, in the business, you build a false wall dichotomy, right? Which I don't believe in. I believe that I have colleagues in IT, and IT has colleagues in marketing and in sales and so forth. So part of it may be also that we need to talk a little bit about how we deconstruct some of the language issues that we create by making this false dichotomy. Secondarily, I would say that when you start talking about data governance specifically, you start talking about who's going to do things like master data management and so forth. And that should all follow the process of the organization. And since it follows the process of the organizations, because that's who owns the data, by the way. If you talk about data ownership, it's another question that comes up frequently. Who owns the data? It's the owner of the process that owns the data, because they're the ones that work on it, right? IT owns no data, right? They are a service provider to make sure the data occurs. So whenever you start talking in those terms, it only makes sense that it would be somewhere that would also own the process management for the organization, and IT would be hugely bad at that. So I think you've got to have a business-oriented person leading that type of an organization. The chief data officer really should be the guy who owns process management for the organization as well, because that's where all the data comes from. And so that's why we believe, and I believe, and always have believed, that the best optimal way of having a chief data officer work well within an organization is most likely to have them in some type of a shared services model of some kind, whether that be in operations directly reporting to the CEO, in a strategy office, as Gary's pointed out, and then work that from that perspective. And so that's kind of how I've always approached it. Hope that helps.
Sure did. Michael, did you
Robert, can I just leap in there? Because
you can do.
My current client is a remarkably enlightened client, and they already have some of that structure set up. They don't have a chief data officer because they're a public organization. They probably won't in the short term, just a headcount thing. So is it they have chosen to go with the senior responsible person being not in IT, but in sort of business, in the center of the department, and the data governance team, who are doing a lot of data-y stuff, working, I think, for ease in IT. So, I mean, that's a hybrid model, and if that fits to your points about culture, is that not the way to go? It's sort of taking what is best, seems to be best practice, and trying to fit it into the culture of the business will allow you to, with leaders in those roles, change the business and change its culture.
So let me state that it depends on the decision rights that are given and the decision rights that are upheld, right? So whenever you have a CIO right now who's an enlightened CIO, and he says, absolutely, you can dotted line those folks to you, they will take direction from you and so forth. And then suddenly it's like, yes, this is great. And then there's a budget crunch and they say, well, now I need those folks to work on something else. You have to be careful whenever you start talking about decision rights and overt power, right? So those things are the, inferred power, inferred power versus overt power are two different things. Dotted lines can start to fall down if you don't have an enlightened CEO that will say, no, this is the agreement. And so you need to work on that. My other comment there is that best practices become best practices by challenging the best practice. So as you continue to work through challenging what is this the best practice, you'll find out that something else might emerge. And that's good. That means that you're continuously learning, continuously improving, and so forth. So if you've got a culture where everybody gets along and it's really staked out, then that can work. But it's the triggering events of budget contraction, of organizational change, it's people turnover and things such as that sometimes cause you to then be working in this 1 foot on an iceberg, 1 foot on a boiling volcano, right? So you just have to be careful when you have that dichotomy built out there. Does that make sense?
No, that makes entire sense. I would just add that in this particular case, the CEO equivalent actually sits at top of the information change program and leads the decision making on that, so that the CIO is a deliverer and not a decision maker, which I think in this particular case works.
Excellent. That's great.
So when talking about culture in your organization, we're really talking about people, aren't we? And how people change the way that they work with each other and within the constructs that they have.
Yes, that's
Pretty
correct
much, yeah.
statement. It really is all about people, and so again, that's why I like the idea of getting as close to the business as I can side of the fence, because that's where a lot of the change has to occur. And I've been in environments, back to the IT discussion. I think there's no right or wrong structure. Whatever works. Every organization is going to be a little different. But I've actually been in environments where IT folks could not talk to the business folks. Well, you're not going to get the kind of change you're looking for around culture, especially if you're in IT and you can't talk to the business. So it takes a lot of strong communication and strong messaging, and that's a lot of conversations that have to be had. So you've got to be engaged, heavily engaged, and even embedded on the business side to help get that culture change.
Let me offer a bit of counterpoint, just a hair, and that is to say that culture at an organization pre-existed me arriving. Okay, and whenever I got there, did I have an influence on it? Certainly, but that meant that I had to negotiate latitude with the pre-existing rules, the rituals, the decision rights that were in existence, the history of the organization, how it was contextualized. So people interact with a culture that's set and sometimes predates them. So there is actually, culture is made up of several, you'll see artifacts of culture everywhere. And it's encapsulated inside of the rules that the company has, and how those rules are carried out. So what is the reward system and the punishment system? I used to say that culture is a relatively negative thing, because most of the time you don't know it exists until you do something it doesn't like. And because that's when it snaps back at you. Reward systems generally are, I won't stop you from doing something good, right? That's the reward you get. And we've all got the performance punishment of getting extra things to do whenever you're doing something right. So I think that whenever you start looking at a culture and you start asking questions about what are the rules that everybody kind of flies by, then you're going to see that people reinforce, like Gary said earlier, people reinforce those rules. Okay, and if there's a stated rule and espoused value that isn't actually, and everybody can probably relate to this. People say, "I'll do this," and then when you get in there, you find out they don't do that. They don't enact that value. Then you will start to see that culture is actually the enacted things that push back against the individuals and are reinforced by the individuals as that pushback occurs. That's really what culture is about. It's about setting up the guardrails around which processes and practices will occur so that everybody can take care of dilemmas, overcome problems, and realize outcomes. That's the three things that a culture wants to do.
No, brilliant. I agree. I'm just chucking out some things. So when we're doing our cultural change, one of those, and our people change, one of those concepts we're going to have to sort of get into is changing the idea about data ownership, because back in the olden days, when we moved to using computers, the IT department ruled, and they were seen as the people that dealt with not just the systems but the data that they carried. So how do you get around this idea that it's not the system that owns it, it's the process, and the process, of course, is owned by the person within the business who is delivering that service, that good, that that activity. How do you approach that particular change so that they understand their role in ownership?
I can do this one because I'll tell you, your best friend in the whole wide world is your COO. No doubt about it. Because the operational processes within an organization actually is the place where all of the inputs from the various departments end up. So your sales organization is going to have a pipeline that gets things into them. They're going to actually onboard new customers or deliver new product or whatever the case may be. So, one of the things that most CDOs do is they talk a lot to IT, but you should go talk to your COO, because the chief operating officer of a company is ultimately got to make sure that the trains run on time and so forth. And that's where you start. And you say, well, in order to do that, you want to make sure that the artifacts that come out of all these processes are properly being done, right? And they'll go, and everyone, oh yeah, I want to make sure that's happening. And that's when you start talking to them about, well, that's why you own this data. You own that process, therefore you own the artifacts. And so if you own the artifacts, then I need to make sure that those artifacts are clean, right? That they represent what you want them to represent. Yes, well then that's why IT can't own it. Because the only way that something gets fixed is at its source, and the source is the process, and the people who run the process are the ones who are bypassing the process in order to get bad data in. Now, I just said something that sounds very counterintuitive, but they did that. They didn't care about what the data was going to look like when they did it, and so the measurement comes out bad. If you would go to the COO and tell him, you're bypassing this process, how can we get that process better? And they'll say, well, I need IT to do this. Okay, great. So that's something now we're talking about a describable thing where you have two parts of the organization working together. That's where you need to be, is pulling those two pieces together. Okay. And I think that's something that, I mean, as a COO, I can tell you that's how you get this thing done.
So I have a little bit different perspective on that. I think of the CFO as really your friend. And so when I'm on the business, trying to talk to the business about this kind of change, I try to get it nailed down. I mean, data is driving these processes, and these processes are driving productivity, and they're impacting the dollar line. So the bottom line. So those dollars it's impacting the bottom line, and I try to work that angle to help them understand from a business perspective. I mean, the whole point of business is to make money and be successful and drive the company forward, for example. But really trying to make those kind of connection points for the people to help them understand why the change might be necessary to help drive that innovation to help impact the bottom line. And if you can ever get this, go ahead.
I think that's another key constituent. Absolutely. It's a good point.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, we talk about the $64,000 question. I think this is probably the $64 billion question. So change requires leadership, and leadership is different from managership. It's different from command, and it's not, in data, it's very infrequently taking people and teaching them how to climb a 6-foot wall or go camping in the woods and getting cold and wet and hungry. So how do you see leadership working in this context, in taking the organization and getting it to change?
Yeah, leadership. It's back to the knowledge, skills, and abilities. Whenever I've been in the different organizations and have demonstrated the leadership, it's really all about strong messaging and strong communication skills. And we actually have a whole chapter on this, because you're asking some people to think outside the box. Most people aren't used to thinking that way. So it is going to take very, very strong communication skills, both verbal, as you're standing in front of people, presentation skills. So visual presentations, you really need to be, every time you're out there and you're talking to somebody, you really have to be on message. And that honestly, that keeps me awake at night. That's where I lose sleep, is trying to think about the different strategies from it's almost like playing chess from the different strategies. Would I offend this person? Would I spend a great deal of time thinking through all of those messages to try to make sure that you're talking to the right people, pushing the right buttons, giving the right message. It's not an easy balancing act. It can be quite challenging. David?
Yeah, I think that there's two things to consider when you're talking about can a leader build shared vision? Are they willing to listen to the organization as it talks back to them? And are they systems thinking? Some of the precepts from the fifth discipline, I think, play a role here. And I would say that also we need to realize that the quote unquote resistance to change that you feel actually is only there because people changed to get to where they are. And that's not a point that everybody wants to hear. Change is a transaction, not a monolithic concept. People don't want to necessarily change because they change to get to where they are. They're going to question anything because they question everything to get to where they are right now. So when you go into, and that's a very empathetic conversation to have with somebody when they're talking about suggesting a change transaction for someone to either accept, adopt, or to resist. So when we don't get as much resistance as we think, we call it adoption. But when we get a little bit of resistance, we say they're resistant to change. In reality, it's just a spectrum of people either accepting your premise or not accepting it. Leaders will be very good at making sure that the vision is strong enough and that the what is in it for me is strong enough that people will then come along for the ride. So that's where leadership, to Gary's point, is good communication and making sure you have a shared vision and then listening to the organization as it talks back to you during that time frame. Because again, they change to get to where they are. You want them to change again? Good. Then help them understand where you want them to be, and they'll be more of an adopter rather than a resistor. So,
and just a couple of points there based on what David said. If you start the conversation with all the work they're going to have to do, that's typically not well received because everybody's already got too much work to do. So back to that whiff on what's in it for me. More work is never the message you want to leave them with. It's all about how they can be more productive and get rid of some of the work they're having to do. Anytime that you can find those types of pain points that you can address, those are always going to be well received. As a leader, helping people out like that, that's how you win friends, of course.
Indeed. Guys, as we draw close to the hour, from my perspective, I think I would love to stay on and carry on the conversation because it's fascinating, and I'm finding I can draw some clear analogies with what you've been saying across the projects that I'm currently working on and some that I know are coming up. So I think that's been brilliant. Thank you very much to you two, to Gary and to David. I hope those of you that have stayed with us have drawn as much insight from the comments as I have. There are details being shown for you to contact Gary and David to perhaps personally draw, take the conversation forward, or to take them up on their offers of training or any of the other offers that they have things that they have mentioned in the talk today. So for all of you, thank you very much indeed. And as we close the hour, I want to reiterate my thanks to Gary and to David from the International Society of Chief Data Officers. I'm not going to put up a slide that says here we are, but you can find us on the net at iscdo.com. Love to have you take a look and see if you'd like to join us. I wish you well. I hope whatever you have left of your day, it's now the early evening where I am, that it is productive and that you all stay safe. Thank you very much indeed.
And thank you, Gary, and thank you, David. This ends today's webcast. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. That was marvelous. Really good.
Thanks.
It was a lot of fun. We are so glad and honored that you invited us.
Excellent.
Absolutely.